Tēnā koutou te whānau o Auckland Unitarians. Tēnā koutou nā manuhiri. No haere mai ki tēnei whare karakia a te atua. Welcome. Welcome to this space made sacred over the last 116 years by Auckland Unitarians. To our guests and visitors, we invite you to come sit by our fire and let us share stories. Let us hear your tales of far-off lands, wanderer, and we will tell you of our travels. Share your experience of the holy with us, worshiper, and we will tell you that which we find divine. Come and stay, lover of leaving, for ours is no caravan of despair, but of hope. We would hear your stories of grief and sorrow as readily as those of joy and laughter. For there is a time and a place and a hearing for all the stories of this world. Stories are the breath and word of the Spirit of life, that power that we name love. Come, for our fire is warm, and we have seats for all. Come again and yet again. Come speak to us of what fills your heart, what engages your mind, what resides in your soul. Like any good tourist on our recent trip to Athens and Geneva, I took lots of photos, as did Rachel. I found it interesting what we each wanted to remember. Sometimes the photos are nearly identical, but usually they aren't, even if it's of the same thing. We each brought our own perspective to capturing the object. I confess I find hers more interesting. Perhaps it is her artistic bent. The other thing I noticed is the photos never look exactly like I experienced the reality they sought to capture. They can't capture the context, the temperature, the smells, the sounds, the feelings evoked that existed in the moment the photo was snapped. What these snapshots often do is capture things I wasn't even aware of when taking the photo. These photos remind me of how much we don't see in our daily life. Sadly, these are precisely the things that can most change our perspective and sometimes the direction of our lives. Every endeavor begins with a first step and encounters darkness and difficulty along the way. We know the darkness of ignorance, of fear, and of tyranny, yet we know the dawning of the light, the beginnings of hope, and the renewal of life. Blessed be the eternal power which inspires us to kindle this light. Blessed be the source of light and of life. Sometimes when I choose a sermon title a month in advance, it's an act of faith that I'll have something to say about it when the time comes. Today's was one such occasion. I knew it would be my first sermon upon my return from traveling to Athens and Geneva, both places I had never been. I trusted that the experience would educate, enlighten, and engage me in such a way that my understanding of reality would not be the same when I returned. It had certainly been true after past travels. Like having cataract surgery or new glasses, I trusted that new lenses would expand my perspective of the world. I was not disappointed. It's like having new eyes that can see things that have always been there, but are unseen because Our brains are fixed only to see what we have been conditioned to see. Most of us can only see 1/1000th of the light spectrum. Rarely do we see more than our mind will allow us. Our brain has fixed our lenses to pick up only the familiar and the comfortable. In other words, we see things as black or white. It turns out that it's not seen as believing is true, but believing is seen. We acquire knowledge and information through our 5 senses, primarily our eyes. We have to ask ourselves, how much am I really seeing? Does the next person see different from me? The answer is yes. Everyone has their own angle to look at the external world. For example, many people can witness the same beautiful sunset, but each person sees it differently because they themselves are different. One may be taken aback by the sky awash with multiple colors, while another may feel the warmth of the golden yellows and pinks. Still another may not focus on the colors at all, but instead be reminded of a childhood memory. And yet, ironically, we still see sunset colors only in black and white. As with many things in life, it's all about perspective. One pearl of wisdom observes that our lives are a mere reflection of our perspective. I'm sure you don't doubt it. Just think about how you handle money. Are you a saver or a spender or somewhere in between? Your attitudes about money were probably shaped early in your childhood by how your parents dealt with money. The same can be said of ways to parent, the value of education, who to love and how to love them, involvement in organized religion, being a good employee or employer, the role of unions, what political party represents you best, and all the other activities of being social beings. They are also a reflection of our privilege or lack of it, of our nationality, race, gender, sexual orientation, ability or disability, and other aspects of who we are that were not our choice, but determined by our birth or by other circumstances. Our perspective affects our choices that, in turn, provide a portrait of our life. Our trip to Athens and Geneva went a long way towards painting a portrait of my life that is less black and white and more nuanced and interesting than before I left. The 2 cities were very different lenses, so different they could serve as monocles, but juxtaposed together, each widened my perspective further than they might have alone. Athens is bursting with energy. Due to high levels of unemployment, poverty, and being the gateway to Europe for war refugees, it seems like everybody is hustling to make a euro, that they might survive another day. There is no sense of order, be it the traffic on winding, narrow streets competing with pedestrians who share the space, those hawking their wares or services to tourists eating souvlaki in outdoor cafes, the bustling street bazaars, the myriad buildings from different centuries in various states of disrepair, jammed into every nook and corner, abutting ancient ruins. The graffiti covering every flat surface to be found. I was pleased and relieved the Parthenon has not been tagged yet. Yet as chaotic as it seems, it all works. Perhaps it's due to the majestic Acropolis guarding the ancient city, giving a perspective only something that has experienced 5,000 years of human history can offer. Our 116-year-old sanctuary has a way to go. Perhaps it's the memory of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle walking with students in the ancient agora that reminds modern Athenians to be philosophical about life's meaning and purpose. After all, they've had some good times in the midst of the many bad ones. They have been tyrannized by kings, suffered draconian laws by their own leaders, been drained of wealth by the church, oppressed by empires for centuries at a time, torn apart by class strife, burned out and sacked by wars, and more recently occupied by Hitler and impoverished by European Union monetary policy. Yet, they still strive, still thrive, miraculously, as a modern city of over 3 million people. Perhaps they managed it by remembering that during the age of Pericles in the 5th century BC, they laid the foundations of Western civilization and planted democratic ideals into rocky soil that, in spite of all, took root. With all this before me, it occurred that the Athenian marathon is not just a race, but a state of mind. It is a metaphor for keeping a long view. We all have a role to play now, in whatever context we were born in. But humanity's long journey didn't begin or end with us. In our time, we face what sometimes seems like overwhelming threats beyond our control. Climate change and destruction of the environment being only one. The Athenian lens reminds me to take heart in our human capacity to endure and do what we can to make the world a more hospitable place. It reminds me that ideals such as those in our 7 principles could be enough to make us run one more mile in the marathon of life. Leaving Athens for Geneva was like traveling to a different solar system. So different were they in appearance and tenor. While Athens had an internal order barely visible, Geneva wore order like an expensive gown. Except in the old city, the streets were broad boulevards carefully laid out, filled with trams, buses, and expensive cars. Gardens and green spaces were everywhere, often filled with public art. Everything seemed clean and neat, with window boxes decorating hotel and apartment buildings with flowers. Even the red light district and the neighborhood settled by the recent influx of immigrants refused to be seedy, and graffiti was rare. Pedestrians had plenty of room on wide footpaths and were respectful of crossing with the lights. You never saw that in Athens. Buildings were much newer outside the old city, few older than the mid-19th century, and were well maintained. Public transport was clean, comfortable, and efficient. A wealthy city at the base of the Alps and nestled along the shore of Europe's largest lake, poverty was minimal, or at least well hidden. As Rachel was working as many as 17-hour days at the impressive UN Palace on a new Geneva Convention to make workplaces safe from violence and harassment. We were there for 2 weeks. I had plenty of time to explore the city. If there was a museum of history, art, natural history, science and technology, human rights, or religion, I probably visited. I did pass on the museum featuring the 500-year history of the watch. If it weren't for the Cathedral of St. Pierre, I would have been convinced the city had been created by Walt Disney to be one of its amusement parks that proclaimed themselves to be the happiest place on earth. The cathedral stands at the highest spot in Geneva and reveals that what we see today was born of 2 millennia of religious strife and a strong desire by Genevans for independence and freedom. The neo-Gothic cathedral was built 300 years before the Reformation, and in its architecture looks like many cathedrals of the period. However, it had been stripped of most of its ornamentation after John Calvin brought his version of rigorous religious reform to Geneva. In particular, the importance of the altar was reduced by the addition of a large pulpit. The severity of the religion was captured in Calvin's chair, not a throne like the ones the bishops sat on, but a diminutive wooden chair, clearly not made for comfort during long sermons. I did not spend long there, as there was little to see, and what there was, I expected to see. It wasn't until I left that I saw that there was an architectural site under the cathedral. I paid my 5 francs and spent the next 2 hours exploring over 2,000 years of religious observance that had occurred on the site. The present cathedral had been built on top of the ruins of 3 cathedrals that once sat side by side. They, in turn, were built over Celtic ruins that long preceded Julius Caesar's encampment in Geneva in 58 BC. As I descended layer by layer into the site, I was struck by how much religion was shaped not only by those who came before, but by whatever was the present culture. It wasn't always that the religion of the day shaped society, but vice versa as well. My other observation was that diversity comes at a cost. Geneva's religious history was fairly peaceful until Geneva, which declared herself a city of refuge, welcomed the Protestant Huguenots being run out of France. With them came John Calvin. This dour Protestant would eventually be the spiritual leader of Geneva. This was not welcomed by the Catholics and their political allies, but the new religion became quite popular, and 13 years after his arrival, Genevans declared themselves a Protestant city. It would be from Geneva that Protestantism, I know I can get that out, in its many forms, would largely be spread around the globe. Unitarianism was one of those variants of the Reformation, but ironically, it suffered at the hands of Calvin. Michael Servetus, who wrote tracts against the Trinity, united Calvin and the Catholic Inquisition in their desire to silence him and his heresy. Together, they arrested, tried, and burned him at the stake, making him the first Unitarian martyr. As his ashes were scattered, there is no burial site, but I did go in search of a memorial to him, marked by his statue. The statue evokes a poignancy over religion's ability to bring out the best and the worst in humankind. I left with a sense that we cannot just put a new gown on abuse sanctioned by religion and pretend it isn't true. That was the gift of a new lens Geneva offered me. Even in an increasingly secular New Zealand, destructive religious values persist, as they were brought here by our forebears. Occasionally, they exist openly, as in our resistance to adopt separation of church and state. But for the most part, they are to be found just below the surface in our culture, protecting privilege at the expense of the vulnerable. I suspect that some form of religion will always be a part of the human experience. But may we see clearly with new lenses how to make it more compassionate, liberating, and just. We are well positioned to keep religion honest. At least we can try during our moment of running the marathon. For our meditation, I offer these words by Kathy Preston, which, of all things, are in her book about veganism for your reflection. Ralph Waldo Emerson once asked what we would do if the stars only came out once every 1,000 years. No one would sleep that night, of course. The world would create new religions overnight. We would be ecstatic, delirious, made rapturous by the glory of God. Instead, the stars come out every night, and we watch television. For my closing words, blessed is the path on which you travel. Blessed is the body that carries you upon it. Blessed is your heart that has heard the call. Blessed is your mind that discerns the way. Blessed is the gift that you will receive by going. Truly blessed is the gift that you will become on the journey. May you go forth in peace.